A Saudi warship has been attacked off the coast of Yemen, causing a large explosion on board. This video was released by a TV station run by the rebel Houthi movement, which claims to have carried it out. The Saudi state news agency said the frigate had been on patrol west of Hodeidah when it was attacked by 3 suicide boats belonging to the Houthi militias. 2 crew members were reportedly killed and 3 others injured. They're said to be in a stable condition and the fire was put out by the crew. The Houthis, who control the capital Sana'a, said the warship had been involved in aggression against coastal cities and Yemeni fishermen. The Saudi-led coalition said the attack would damage the flow of humanitarian aid for civilians.
الله أكبر الموت لأمريكا الموت لإسرائيل اللعنة على اليهود الناس للإسلام. سيارات الإسعاف وهي للتهرع لنقل الجرحى من برج الخشل بعدما استهدفه أبطال الجيش واللجان الشعبية بعدد من القذائف. قوة القوة يا ولي قوة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. هذا أحد أطقم الجيش السعودي وهو يشرد. قوة القوة. حمزة. شردوا أعداء الله شردوا من البرج. الله أكبر شردوا هروب جماعة الجنود العدو من موقع الخشل. دفاعية.
Now, the United Nations panel of experts has concluded that most of Saudi airstrikes on Yemen over the past 2 years have actually not targeted legitimate military positions. In a report sent to the Security Council, the UN monitor said Riyadh's failure to meet international humanitarian law requirements of proportionality and precautions could amount to war crimes. According to the report, the Saudi warplanes killed nearly 300 Yemeni civilians, including at least 100 women and children between March and October last year. The panel further described the Saudi war and its impoverished southern neighbor as devastating to both infrastructure and civilians. Joining us now to discuss this further is Anthony Hall. He's the editor-in-chief of the American Herald Tribune, and he joins us via Skype from Alberta. Many thanks for joining us here on Press TV, Mr. Hall. Now, what the UN panel of experts is saying is something that has been argued by different NGOs and even Yemeni representatives for well over 2 years now. What do you make of this revelation, so to speak?
Well, this assault on Yemen and the Houthi people particularly doesn't get a lot of coverage in the West, but it is a very telling episode of our times. Saudi Arabia, kind of proxy army of the West in a way, is heavily armed. Western companies love selling them weapons, and this is a place to deploy these weapons en masse. This UN panel, which was created in 2014, they've been doing important work exposing in a detailed way that this assault, it's not targeting military populations, it's to pulverize infrastructure, to punish the Houthi people collectively, including the civilian populations and the general population of Yemen. And so that 8 of these 10 strikes that were looked at were not targeting military installations. They were targeting infrastructure. The Yemen situation, the Yemen people there, it's a very poor country. It's a very fragile situation there. There is a need for imported food. So there's a huge civilian humanitarian crisis. And this report with Jamie McGoldrick at the head of this panel of experts is very important in providing in a detailed way the evidence that shows that there are crimes against humanity war crimes possibly involved in these assaults, and
right,
who
Mr.
can
Hall, let me just jump in there. As you've just mentioned that figure over there, 8 out of 10 strikes on Yemen have been on non-military targets, according to these reports. Now, that is a staggering number. You can't even imagine what kind of destruction that will be spreading across the civilian infrastructure as well as civilian lives. However, this war is now going to go into its 3rd year this March. And yet, as you've just mentioned, it doesn't even get enough traction in international news.
Yes, and of course, Saudi Arabia is at the point, the wedge of this assault, but many countries, including the United States, Britain, France, Malaysia, Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, Sudan, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, are part of this coalition that obviously need to see the Saudi Peninsula, the Arabian Peninsula, with a government in Yemen that is in favor of their position. These polities are largely, puppet regimes kept in place, like the Bahrain regime. They're kept in place by a supply of Western weapons, Western intelligence. So there's a huge coalition of interests behind this assault on the Yemeni civilian population. And so the responsibility for this humanitarian devastation and crisis is very broad.
All right, let's leave it there for now. That's Anthony Hall, editor-in-chief of the American Herald Tribune, joining us via Skype from Alberta. Mr. Hall, as always, thanks very much indeed.
At least 57 people, mostly civilians, were killed when U.S. President Donald Trump authorized the use of killer drones against al-Qaeda suspects in Yemen's southeast last week. Although the U.S. Army claims it killed 3 al-Qaeda operatives, Yemeni people are angry over the civilian casualties of the attack. They accuse the U.S. of pretending to fight terrorists, while its ally Saudi Arabia is recruiting the same people in Yemen. From the Yemeni capital, Sana Muhammad Al-Attab has more.
A recent unprecedented American military operation in Yemen's province of Bayda killed 57 civilians. It has drawn angry reactions from the Yemenis, particularly because it was carried out at dawn and also claimed the lives of women and children.
What did these 15 women and children do wrong to deserve being killed by the U.S. forces that wanted to kill 3 al-Qaeda members? These are war crimes against humanity. Justice should be served.
Many critics of U.S. policies in the Middle East accuse Washington of adopting double standards in the so-called war on terror. Illegal killings of innocent people under the pretext of the war against terror has drawn angry reactions from Yemeni civilians. Experts say the U.S. recent operation is an evidence of the new approach adopted by the U.S. administration under President Donald Trump. Hamad Attab, Press TV, Sana'a.
A report by Doctors Without Borders has compiled the experiences of medics working in Yemen. They claim the health system has all but collapsed. The country has been under the constant bombardment of Saudi-led coalition airstrikes. The medics also say that for many, the only option is to stay at home and bleed to death, rather than risk travelling to hospital.
The only patients who come to our emergency room at night are dreadfully ill. People say that car headlights can attract sniper fire or other attacks, and that the risks of being caught in crossfire increases, so they normally avoid moving after dark.
It was after lunch, and all the women were on the 3rd floor. I was washing dishes in another building. Everything was very calm, but then suddenly a mortar hit the house. It killed my aunt, my grandmother, my uncle's wife, and 2 of my cousins. My aunt's 2-month-old baby was also in that room, but he survived. People needing care have only 2 options: stay in their houses and bleed to death, or take the risk and come to the hospital to save their lives. They don't feel safe.
According to Transparency Group, the Yemen Data Project, 1/3 of Saudi-led coalition airstrikes have targeted civilian sites, including hospitals, schools and markets. That includes 4 hospitals run by Doctors Without Borders. Medics from the organisation say the Saudi-led coalition doesn't respect the protected status of medical facilities and that more protection is vital.
One of the main problems in Yemen is that too many health facilities are being caught up in the conflict. Dozens of hospitals and health facilities have been hit. MSF itself has had 4 hospitals bombed since this war erupted. In Taiz, a mobile clinic was hit, injuring 2 of our colleagues. In Taiz, regularly health workers are being hit by snipers or shrapnel as they're conducting their work. There needs to be more protection.
Very difficult from a emotional perspective to work in these centers, because are you a target in these hospitals? And for me it's very clear, and it's also very easy for me to say that don't touch my patients, don't touch my staff members, because the only thing we want to do over there is give healthcare to people.
Well, according to the World Health Organization, there are no doctors in around 20% of the districts. Less than half of all health facilities are functional, while just 43% of hospitals can diagnose and treat infections. And less than half of the hospitals can provide injury care at all. Christopher McAleer from Doctors Without Borders explains exactly how dire the situation is.
The problem is the population in Taiz actually needs everything, because there's such a lack of support going into Taiz because of the security situation, because it's difficult to bring things in, that for me to say it would be one thing over another, it wouldn't matter. My staff, for example, or our staff, have had to move 2 or 3 times because the front line has moved, or they're under fire from shelling, so they need shelter. Hospitals are being hit by shelling, being harassed by armed groups, so healthcare is a need. So in Taiz, there is every need, and every need is actually very acute.
Well, Doctors Without Borders reiterated their calls in the report for all warring parties to ensure the protection of civilians and health workers. An expert panel from the UN has investigated 10 separate attacks by the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen. It concluded that they were deliberate assaults on peaceful targets and may amount to war crimes, warning that coalition allies are obliged to respect international humanitarian law.
In 8 of the 10 investigations, the panel found no evidence that the airstrikes had targeted legitimate military objectives. The panel considers it almost certain that the coalition did not meet international humanitarian law requirements of proportionality and precautions in attack. The panel considers that some of the attacks may amount to war crimes.
Well, the UK remains a staunch ally of Saudi Arabia and is one of its biggest weapon suppliers. Britain has sold £3.3 billion worth of arms to Riyadh since March 2015, when the conflict in Yemen began. That includes more than £2 billion worth of warplanes, helicopters and drones, meaning the Saudis now have twice as many UK-made warplanes than Britain's own Royal Air Force.